Thank you so much to Brooke and Johann for being our special guests today. They have been recently returned from Zambia and Uganda. Today we're going to discuss Zambia. But if you have any questions about their other travels, Brooke was also in Kenya in the last couple of months. And she's actually headed to South Africa on Thursday. So if you have any questions, feel free to shout out. We'll do a little quick Q&A at the end of the session. But we will take it from here. So as I mentioned, we're going to discuss Zambia and the areas beyond just Vic Falls, which seems to be the more famous destination. Oh my gosh, working. Okay, your hosts today are myself, but I'll do the least amount of talking, Laura, and Brooke and Johann. So just to give you an overview, if you haven't joined us before, our company is Africa Endeavours, and we handcraft dream vacations to some of the most exotic, rejuvenating, and excited places on Earth. I won't read this through in entirety, but it just gives you a little bit of a synopsis of who we are. And our Africa business focuses mostly on Southern and Eastern Africa. Agenda today, we'll do a Zambia overview with Laura. Brooke and Johann will recap their recent trip, and then we'll have a quick discussion or a quick Q&A about Africa. Any questions you do have, feel free to pop them in the chat window, and we will discuss that at the end. Okay, Laura, you want to kick it off?
Yep, thanks, Candice. So we're just going to start off with some information here. So first off is, how do you get to Zambia? So you're going to fly into one of two gateway airports, Lusaka, which is also the capital of Zambia, or Livingston, the entry point to Victoria Falls. To the left, you'll see a handful of airlines that fly or connect to Zambia. There are many other airlines that are also accessible to U.S. travelers. Flights are obviously being added back to the schedule as we speak, as countries continue to open and travel continues to expand. So kind of keep your eyes open there. Any local flights that you take will either be charter or pro-flight Zambia. And that's pretty much covers that. Candice, you can move to the next one. Entry and COVID requirements. So there is a visa requirement that's always kind of been in place. We suggest that you do that online, particularly now with requirements for travel and things like that. But otherwise it can be purchased upon arrival as well. And you can always do the CASA visa, which is a Zimbabwe and Zambia visa, if you plan to cross over the border to see the falls. Currently, there is a proof of a negative test requirement within 14 days of travel. We do understand that that is likely being moved to 7 days. So we would just kind of suggest that in general, and that's a bit more in line with every other country than the 14 days, which is a larger window. So something to kind of keep in mind there, as well as a completed risk assessment form. Just like here, you're going to have a mask in public places, outdoor spaces, things like that, as well as hand sanitizer, temperature screenings, distance markers, and kind of all of that safety protocol. As of October 20th, a negative test is required to exit, as well as dependent upon which airline you take, it might be required to transit through another country as well. But we would walk you through all of those logistical requirements when traveling to and from Zambia, and what would apply to your trip at the dates of travel. As far as when to go, Zambia is a year-round destination. Of course, it might depend on your interests, whether you're going for a safari like the Big Five, birding, or photography. That might change what time of year you actually wish to visit. The ideal travel months are June to September, just because October to May you do definitely see higher temperatures and rainfall. There will be some seasonal camps that will close during that time frame as well. The falls also ebb and flow throughout the year, dependent upon rain levels. And I will go ahead and show you a photo coming up in the next few slides about how that can change and the positives and negatives to that as well. So here's a map of Zambia for you. So the red arrows are those 2 entry points that I listed out, Livingston and Lusaka. And then we have the blue stars, and those indicate the 4 locations that I'm going to touch on today. And of course, there's many more off the beaten path destinations like the North Luangwa, Lake Kariba, and actually a pretty easy spot that most people skip over, which is the capital city of Lusaka. Today we're going to start at the falls. So Livingston is the border city to Zimbabwe and the access point to Victoria Falls. The city itself offers everything from historical museums to local markets and cultural experiences. There are several accommodations that you can enjoy, giving you close access to town and the falls, such as the Royal Livingston, which is an Anantara property. Or there's my favorite style of accommodation in this region, which is a riverfront property, which you'll see here. This is Zambezi, which I believe Brooke and Johann will touch on. I always suggest extend your stay a few more nights and enjoy a water safari, particularly if you are combining your trip and your stopover with like South Africa, for example. You can see elephants and hippos via Makoro or boat on the Zambezi River. I've stayed at several lodges along the river. I have stayed at Zambezi as well. It's amazing. And they're only 30 minutes to maybe an hour and a half outside the city at most, just depending upon how remote you prefer to be. So it is still easily, accessible to the falls and stopping in there and doing some of those activities. So we have the falls here, which are the photos I was referencing in the different seasons. And this is why you're likely in Livingston in the first place. So I've visited on several occasions, but this will just show you kind of how things change. So the photo on the left depicts very high water levels. This was from several years ago. The water was extraordinarily high, and I was standing here at the start of the falls. I couldn't even walk halfway down the pathway because the mist was so heavy that I really couldn't even see my hand in front of me, so I had no idea where I was going. This photo happened because the wind happened to shift just at the right time, and I managed to snap that. Versus the photo on the right, this is during my last trip just in November. I'm standing at the exact opposite end of the falls and could see the whole way back, walk the whole pathway. So when the water is this low, not only is it still flowing, like a lot of the newspapers tend to kind of make a big deal out of that they've dried up. Well, they haven't dried up. This is what it looks like. But you can see the rock formations. You can see how grandiose everything is. And then you'll get some opportunities to do different activities during this season, like, take a helicopter tour to actually see the gorge, Devil's Pool. And then there's a bunch of other activities that are available year round, like whitewater rafting, microlight flights, bungee jumping, etc. So now I'm going to move to Kofui. Kofui is accessed via Lusaka via road transfer or flight. Depending upon where you're going in the park, we do usually recommend the scenic flight, just a bit more fun, gets you a little bit further in, a little bit easier on you. It is Zambia's largest national park and features the Kofui River and the Busanga floodplains, which is a large source of water for many animals like antelope and wildebeest and their predators, cheetah, wild dog, hyena, and lion. The main draw to Kofui is access to a private safari experience, which is really a rare find in Southern Africa. If you're looking at going to something like Kruger, you're definitely going to have an amazing experience. There's just going to be a lot more traffic. So in addition to walking safaris here, you can do night drives. You can see over 400 species of birds that reside in the wilderness here. And the park just attracts less visitors and the lodges are more spread out. So it's just really kind of a special experience when you don't run into other boats, other cars, things like that. The next destination worth mentioning is the lower Zambezi. I visited this national park on my very first trip to Southern Africa, and it just left me with really fond memories. The water frontage allows for some unique experiences like tiger fishing and seriously the most gorgeous sunsets that you'll see. And then, of course, the nearby Mapula Forest, I like to tell people, remind me of Narnia, just the way that the light shines in through the trees. You will want to visit this region in the dry months. The animals flock to the river for food and water, so there's a lot of activity there, which is really fun. This photo here I actually took when I was there. There's very large hippopods, so you're going to have babies, you're going to have older hippos, but they're everywhere, and that's not something that you're going to get on, for example, a safari in South Africa. So that's unique to this region. The lower Zambezi can also be accessed by a road from Lusaka, but again, highly recommend the scenic flight. You fly over some hills and mountains. It's really beautiful. And last but not least, the South Luangwa National Park. So Zambia is well known for its walking safaris, and this is where it all got started. This park features large herds and predators galore, particularly leopard, as well as a few endemic species that you won't find elsewhere, like cross-shaped zebra and thorny-crafts giraffes. Here you'll find a variety of accommodation available to you, everything from permanent luxury lodges to remote tented, a lot more simple camps. It's really quite common to plan an itinerary where you're going to walk between some of those different camps. So you might go from glamorous to a bit more simple for a few days where you can sit out, see the stars because there's nothing else around you. You'll see animals along the way, and then you'll return to the nice luxury lodge. And that really gives you the most out of the experience for this big game park. And there's a lot to see and do here. Now, that's just kind of a basic overview, so I'm going to pass it on to Candice, Brooke, and Johann, who just returned, who will give you a little bit more information on their experiences and kind of what's happening now in Zambia.
Thanks, Laura. So just a real brief touch base. Brooke and Johann are just going to talk briefly about COVID protocols and just their experience of entry requirements and the logistics and things like that, and then they're going to get into the fun stuff of what it's like now to travel in Zambia and all the cool experiences they had on their recent trip. So I am going to give it over to Brooke and Johann. Oh, there they are.
Thanks, Candice.
Thank you so much, and thank you for involving us in your talk. And it's always lovely to talk about one of my favorite countries out there, which I believe offer not just some of the best experiences and the most varied experiences, but also very good value overall, looking at safaris, in the wider perspective. So these are just sort of the early pictures. This was us, I believe, on the train in DC. We went out in September. There were still very few people in the airport. So many of you may have, experienced some domestic travel, since, things started opening up a little bit. And for me, when you're thinking of considering a trip somewhere, anywhere in the world these days, there's sort of three parts of the risk that you need to assess. One is your international flight, of course. Are you safe on that flight? Are you going to get sick? What are the risks involved with that? Then once you get to your destination, you got to get around. And in most parts of Africa, that's typically flying between lodges nowadays, as sometimes you fly an hour or drive 8 hours. So for most of us, it's flying. So you got to make sure that experience is also handled well. And then there's the reason we go to Africa, the lodge experience, a safari. I mean, that's got to be good. Otherwise, why spend your time and money on it? You may as well stay at home. So those are the three sort of components. And through this, I'm just going to kind of use our experience as we had it. And Brooke, feel free to chip in as I drone on. It's just way more exciting than me.
I'm like, what's the time already?
This was still in DC. Now, when it comes to international flights, I mean, if you do a bit of research, there's been a lot of reports coming out from entities who are not selling international flights, like the Pentagon did one, that your chances of actually picking up COVID on an international flight is vanishingly remote. Something like 1 in 27 million. And always look at that and say, look, I mean, even if they're off by 100 times, a factor of 100 times, it's 1 in 2.7 million. So it's still very, very low between the way that they clean the planes nowadays. And Brooke and I, a couple of years ago, you know, we flew a lot, you know, at least a couple of times a month. So we always, in the winter, you would always get flu from the surfaces you touch or something. So we started long ago traveling with wet wipes and just wiped the plane, the tray table and everything down. And it was shocking how brown and dirty those things came back, you know, last year and the year before, because they literally clean these planes once every 2 months or something, I've read. And nowadays, that little thing comes out pretty clean, you know, like, so they do actually clean the planes well, and the HEPA filters work really well. So I personally feel, from my experience and from everyone's experience, and more important, from the research being done, and one that stood out for me was also from the airlines, that they do not have higher levels of COVID among their staff, which spends hours and hours on a plane every day, than the general public. Because if it was kind of circulating around a plane and you're catching it there, air hostesses or attendants or whatever they're called nowadays,
Flight attendants.
Flight attendants, you know, would get it more than we do.
We fly a lot, we swear.
I know, right? Well, so actually the next picture shows the two of us in one of the planes when we were traveling. And so as Candice said at the beginning, I flew to Kenya, and then we flew to Zambia. We actually extended our stay in Zambia and went up to Uganda, and then I leave this week to go to South Africa. So, and we did some domestic travel within there as well. So we have flown in economy and business. We've flown on United, Lufthansa, Ethiopian, a lot of different flights. And I think what makes the most kind of visual sense to me is that all of these numbers that Johann just said, that equates to you have a higher likelihood of getting struck by lightning than getting COVID on a plane. So you really, I mean, I felt very safe traveling on a plane. People take it seriously. And, you know, the number one question I think that I've always gotten is, isn't it hard to wear a mask for that long? Isn't it uncomfortable? Or, you know, how do you do on a long haul wearing a mask? And I think at the end of the day, for me, what it comes down to is, as humans, we are so just resilient and malleable. I mean, do you remember when we had to start taking our shoes off to go through security? That was a really big deal. And now it's just a part of what we do, or our liquids or whatever it might be. If someone said to me, I'm not going to wear a mask on a plane, so I'm not going to go to Africa, I would say, well, that's your choice, but there's no way I'm giving up going to Africa just because I have to wear a mask for a little bit longer. It's not that bad on the plane at all.
One little tip that I have, especially for those kind of masks too, is I took an extra ribbon and then tied the ear loops together behind my head, so it doesn't pull on my ears, but sits on that band. And that's just, you know, makes a huge difference for me, at least.
And I put lavender oil on the inside. It smells nice and it's relaxing.
Not sticking on my ears. So on the next slide, that is our arrival in Zambia. So we flew into Lusaka, and a factor, you know, apart from the three, the international, domestic, and then the on the ground experience, another factor that's sort of our peripheral but plays into that is the country that you're going to. I mean, how prevalent is COVID in that country? Are they running the numbers we're running? You know, you're probably not wanting to visit, you know, the US at the moment if you're from somewhere else. You know, so what is the situation in the country? And Zambia, for me, you know, they've got very, very low COVID numbers. It's actually the same in Uganda and in most of Africa, apart from South Africa has slightly higher numbers, but they have got it fairly under control now. We were looking up yesterday just some statistics, like, you know, and to kind of put it in perspective. And we chose Illinois just because you're based there. You know,
sorry about this, our Chicago friends.
I mean, Illinois has a population of 12.7 million people roughly, and they've had about 725,000 cases by yesterday and about 13,000 deaths. In comparison, Zambia has 17.4 million people. Since the start of COVID, they've documented only 17,500 cases and about 350 deaths. I mean, active current cases at the moment that have not been healed and gone home is less than 1,000. And most of those are in a big city. So when you get to many of these countries in Africa, people are trying to figure out why. Is it the younger population, the TB inoculations they had as kids, or whatever it is? But the bottom line is that your numbers are really, really low. And, you know, your random chances of being even close to someone with COVID is actually, you know, much, much lower than going to the grocery store here or around town.
But also I'll add, so if you look at the next slide, which shows us in now the airport as well, I just had this conversation with the nurse who did my COVID test an hour ago for my upcoming trip, and I shared these numbers with her. And what it came down to too, is we said at the end of the day, and this is just the way it is people are abiding by the rules and the regulations in African countries. So you can see, I mean, there's social distancing markers. I loved that you have the hand sanitizer for your trolley, and, you know, everyone's wearing masks. I mean, they have really gone the distance. I've documented now travel in so many different airports, and it's only in Africa that I'm seeing things like this, the constant signage, the constant separation of seats. It's prevalent, but it does not at all ruin your experience. It's just that you're so aware that they're taking it seriously. And that's from the international airport all the way then to the domestic flights. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the next photo shows you us boarding one of those Pro flights that Laura was speaking about. And Pro flight runs both scheduled and they do charter. And while we were there, they were just launching their inaugural flight from Lusaka to Johannesburg. So making it easier to combine countries, which has been a challenge during this particular time. But, you know, that's Johann. I'm standing in line, but they sanitize everyone. They make sure that, again, your temperature is taken. They're sanitizing. Like, you cannot get away from being squirted at all over the place. And same thing, they make sure that you're wearing masks, and it's a very safe, easy, seamless experience.
No, so that's that second leg, the domestic flight. So firstly, the arrival was easy. Currently, a negative test within 14 days is still the requirement. They talked about changing it to 7. They haven't yet. I would plan on 7 because that will be, you know, where it will probably go in the near future, because 14 days is a bit too liberal. 7 days would be more likely. And then, so we actually met with the director of the flight operations for Pro Flight. We talked to them through their protocols and cleaning protocols. And as Brooke mentioned, when you step inside a building, be it a shopping center, you know, the airport, even before you board the plane, there's always a squirt of hand sanitizer. Everyone's wearing masks. So I felt quite safe on both international and domestic flights. And that then brings you to where you're going. You know, in the next slide there is your arrival at the lodges. Now, I don't know, I've kind of coined the saying, I think it was even in the email for this, that overall my feeling of traveling in times of COVID in Africa is that your lodge experience is 98% of what it normally would be. And the 2% deduction is basically hand washing as you arrive, and, you know, sanitizer, and then taking temperatures. Everyone has a little temperature gun that they take on your skin or on your neck or forehead, depending on where you are. So be prepared to have your temperature taken every time you return to a lodge or something. But those are, I mean, meaningless inconveniences. I mean, they really don't affect your experience on the ground much at all.
No, you see a little bit more signage, and, you know, everyone is set up. These are actually hands-free stations. So you use your feet on the pedals to get the soap and to get the water. So, you know, you're not really touching anything, and the staff is masked, and they're just smizing, right? They're giving you those warm, welcome Zambian smiles just behind the masks. And the thing also to remember is that they're trying to protect themselves as well, right? We're the travelers, but for us as the travelers, quite honestly, most of the time we took off our masks because we were socializing together. We were having a meal together. So while they were wearing their masks, we were not wearing our masks every single second of every single day on activities. And most of your experience, again, it's not limited. Like the next picture shows you one of our suites on Zambezi Island. It's all open air. You've got the fresh air, the breeze, so you are really truly outside. I like that people say Africa is already set up for social distancing and for what we've all experienced, hopefully a little bit over the summertime. You can dine outside, you can walk outside. I had a massage in the suite because it's all open air. She was wearing a mask, I was not. So as the traveler, as the guest.
You did put on a mask when you turned on your back.
In Zambia?
Yeah.
No. Oh, in Lusaka. Yeah. You're right, in Lusaka I did. So from one place to another, it might be a little different. And he's absolutely right. I forgot about that at latitude 15 I did. But again, your experience is not changed outside of, again, like a little bit of signage maybe here and there. The food and the wine is still top notch, absolutely exceptional. And then again, all of those experiences that you can be having. We went and had sundowners on the sandbar. We've got a couple of photos of these, coming up now that shows our dining on Zambezi, the sandbar. And one of the things that is the most amazing too is we were completely alone. I mean, because so few people are traveling right now, the experiences that you can have really are very tailored just to you. Fewer people on vehicles, fewer people on boats, fewer people doing any of those particular activities. Candice, do you want to go forward a couple for us?
Oh yeah, there's the wine.
You still have the great food and wine outside. I mean, it's such an outdoor experience. I mean, you have wonderful sundowners going out by boat. So when we arrived here, the staff that was behind the table at that time, they were having their masks on and they kept them on. What we found is on some game drives and the likes, we tell the guide, okay, this is an open vehicle, we're moving, we feel comfortable. You've been at the lodge for 2 weeks, you haven't gone home. We felt safe, but it's the guest and what the guest feels and what the guest feels safe with. There were some people who never took their mask off, some guests, and that's fine. No one cares. But in these remote areas where there's been very, very low instances of it, you have some flexibility, I think, without really increasing your risk. The next slide shows a lot of the activities that we did, which were also tremendously fun because even though I've had the beauty and the privilege of being in this area before, I've never done a microlight. I've never done the walking with a rhino experience. We have been into Devil's Pool. We've been here with friends before where we've gone rafting. So you can see all of the experiences you can still have. What I will say though is you kind of see me here in the upper left-hand corner. Again, the one thing that's maybe different is they're doing a lot of contact tracing. So they just want to have your information. And my little, insider tip then is take a picture of your passport and have it on your phone because they're going to ask you for that information as you travel around. And I was able to just put it all down, passport information, contact information, and then we carried on our way. So there's a little bit more paperwork and then you get to go and have a tremendous amount of fun. So yeah, we were able to do all these activities in Big Falls and, love Devil's Pool. If you're there in low water season, which is typically sort of from September, normally somewhere in August actually, through November and sometimes into January, February, March, it is a once in a lifetime experience. The microlight was great, but all the activities are there. Again, a bit of hand washing. Even when you go into the falls, they put some sanitizer on your hands and they just ask you to keep your distance from other people. So they do take it seriously, but your experience is very much the same as what it was before. In fact, on safari, as we'll move on to the safari destinations, I actually think your safari experience, it's a once in a lifetime sort of opportunity to get to some of the popular parks with no one else there or very few other people there. Places where, let's say you're in the Kofui area, you would normally, on a normal high season day, because there's a couple of lodges in the main part of the park, you'll see a number of vehicles during a day, maybe 10, 15, whatever, like as you're driving around, or 20 even. We saw one, and then another day we saw none. So you do get a chance to get to some of these parks and experience it like it was 30 or 40 years ago. Plus fewer people on a vehicle, quite a good chance of even getting a private vehicle. They do accommodate that as they can. You can move to the next one there, Candice.
Just really quick, I'm just going to touch on, just for those who don't know what Devil's Pool is, because you guys have been talking, do you want to just briefly describe that and what photo, because people might not know what you're talking about.
Oh, sorry, that's the lower left. And that is, I mean, you can kind of see, well, it's hard to see. Like you can see Victoria Falls on the lower right under the microlight. And more or less that white spot is where the little island, Livingston Island, is. And it's an interesting little place because that's where David Livingstone, you know, the European who discovered the falls, first set foot there and, you know, saw the falls from there. Now you can go by motorboat, which is much safer to get there. And then in low water season, there is this, it's kind of like, think about an infinity pool or a rim flow pool that you find in beautiful hotels in Mexico and Italy and everywhere. But it's a natural one, a rock pool. So you cross a bit of water to get there. There's guides leading you everywhere. And then when you get to this little pool, you can literally lie on the edge of the falls. It looks way more dangerous than it is because it's like a rim flow pool. You're not at your swimming pool in Bali worrying that you're going to fall over the side of the pool. I
still worry a little bit, I'm not going to lie.
There's a bit of current, but not too much. And there's guides. They strategically step out of the picture when you need them to sometimes, but they generally right there and basically look after every step you take. Okay, now come here, now put your foot here, now step here, now pose for the picture. And they're very good at taking pictures and videos. We can send you links to that if you want them. But it's
I basically say, actually,
not for someone scared of heights.
Devil's Pool is probably the most brag-worthy experience you're ever going to have in Africa, because many people, the majority of people, are going to go to Africa and see a lion. The majority of people are going to go to Africa and have really good food and wine. Going and sitting on the edge of the falls and having a photo like this where you are a foot away from the edge, yeah, that definitely earns some bragging points for anyone who can make their way on out there. And it's seasonal. So, you know, Candice, Laura, the team, as they've kind of talked about the difference in the time of year, will tell you when the best time is to go, when you could actually do a Devil's Pool experience, because that's not open year round, because it does depend on how the water is flowing, or in this particular case, not flowing.
Exactly. Speak to the African Endeavours team. They can guide you as to the funnest experience to have in this area.
But yeah, so then we went actually to South Luangwa. So, you know, we went to a lot of the places that Laura spoke about in the intro, and these are just a couple of photos of the teams, the camps. As Laura was speaking about, you've got some tented experiences that are more toned down. You've got some like more upmarket villa experiences, but the safari in South Luangwa is absolutely just stunning. It is one of the most incredible places.
Yes, South Luangwa is arguably the #1 destination from a safari perspective in Zambia. Some people will say Lower Zambezi. I mean, those two are, to me, are like some of the top places to go to. And it's got a rich history. It's got a lot of characters over the years that pioneered the safari industry here. And to this day, it has built its reputation on walking safaris as well. So where most or many safari areas in Africa will offer you some walking, here they take it to a next level. Like if you are interested, you can just do vehicle safaris, and lower right, there's actually Bush Camp Company's custom safari photographic vehicle. So you can just do vehicle safaris if you want to, but if you are interested, and specifically in the mornings, they'll do 2-3 hour walks. And the big difference in Zambia is, you know, if you're walking around many other parts of Africa, you're kind of looking at the small little things and, you know, stick your toe in the mud, the buffalo was rolling in and things like that. But in Zambia, they'll actually walk you into bigger animals. Like you can approach buffaloes or elephants or even lions safely, you know, guide with a gun, people knowing what they do, very experienced, very safety conscious in doing it, but it's also thrilling and exhilarating, and kind of it's a different level of safari experience. And for that, Zambia is very good, in South Luangwa in particular. The guide on the upper left there, that's how we started out. He was wearing his mask. And, you know, somewhere through the trip, we were like, how long have you been in camp? And he's like, well, I've been here for like 2.5 weeks now. And then we're like, okay, well, you know, why don't you drop your mask? You know, like, we're fine, you know, like, but that was our decision, not his. You know, he's there to look after us. again, it's open air. We had breakfast in the bush like that. We had lovely couples massage there. And we put a mask on when we turned, onto our backs, just out of courtesy for them and for us. And so it's very easy to manage the situation.
The Africa Endeavours team actually knows that I'm usually the one doing the spa safari or the shopping safari, and then Johann does the walking safari.
It's something like that. So our trip, there were still fairly limited flights when we were there, and we had limited time. So, our trip was not structured like one would be for a guest. When the African Endeavours team work with you, they'll spend you 3-4 nights here and there and move. We kind of moved around and had a lot of friends to see in the country. So we spend the night here, spend the night there. The next slide is probably the snazziest lodge or the most luxury lodge in the South Luangwa area. And again, we had a beautiful experience, very similar to what we used to, on our previous visit. We were actually here 2 years ago as well. And, the overall guest experience at the lodge was very similar because we were never eating with other couples anyway. So it was just us. Mm-hmm. And the safari experience was amazing. I mean, you'll see in the next slide or two, we spent an hour with this leopard. It was hunting up a little gully and, stalking antelope. There were no other vehicles around. And a couple of 100 yards before we got to the leopard, we saw the whole pride of lion, looking out over the riverbank. And everywhere we went, it was just us. And it was just one of my, I've been to this area probably 6 or 7 times. And that was my all-time favorite one, day of 24 hours of safari in that region, because it was just, wow. It was an opportunity that is not likely going to repeat itself anytime soon.
Well, and Candice, if you want to show some of the other just animal photos that we have there, I will just also reiterate, I loved that opening slide when Candice was speaking about how Africa Endeavours creates rejuvenating safari experiences, because so much of what we're talking about is exactly that. Being in Africa was absolutely rejuvenating from the year that I'm sure we've all shared in some way, shape, or form. And to reiterate what Johann said, it's very rare. There's a couple of places like Sausage Tree that guarantee a private vehicle, but it's rare to just get a private vehicle. It's rare to spend as much time as you want on a sighting because you have somebody who wants to go and see something else or do something else. To be in the open air at our own pace, seeing these incredible animals and being with some of the happiest and most joyful people in the world. I just love the African people. It was truly rejuvenating. So I make fun of, yes, I like spa and all of that kind of stuff, but it was easily the best break of the year to get out of our home, to get out of our town, to be around other
Escape
people.
To Africa.
It just, that's why we keep going back. And I think that if you were to look at going sooner than later, that you'll find a similar experience. When all of these properties are open again in Zambia and you get to go and see, the next slide again, we've got some incredible animal images. It is the most peaceful, serene, I say safe, sane time that I've had this year.
It's really an escape from, the never-ending news cycle here, and opinions and speculating and things like that. It's toned down a bit after the election, but still, it's now, you're seeing all this negative news coming at you. And when you're in Africa, it feels like a distant bad dream, the whole thing that the world had COVID and stuff like that. You really feel removed from it. You really can recharge and then come and face the facts again when you get here.
So then after that, we went out to Kofui, actually. Again, like I said, we went to all the places that Laura spoke about. So we actually drove out to Kofui, which is another option. And we were in our own vehicle and we went to a beautiful property called Ila Lodge that's within the national park. Laura, one of her slides had the completely,
repeat it on the next slide.
The completely solar powered boat that they have. So, again, you're gliding across the water. There's not a sound to be had except for the birds. Actually, so one of the previous slides had some carmine bee eaters, and now talking about the, no, you're good.
I'm going the wrong way. No,
No, it's okay.
I'm still going the wrong way.
I know. I told you I'm bad with tech. Wait, I got it.
So one of the things that it really hit home to me, I'm originally from New York. My family is still there. At the beginning of COVID, we kept hearing that nature was rejuvenating itself and all of these birds were coming back to New York. And actually, it's not that all of these birds were coming back to New York. It's that New York just got still and silent and quiet. And you could hear things in a different way. And now sorry, Candice, to do this to you.
I know how to go forward. It's the backward.
That photo of the boat, I mean, being on a completely silent safari, what was happening around us, the wind through the leaves, the bird life, hearing this incredible herd of buffalo that we got very close to on the shores. Again, every one of our senses was touched in a very different way because of just how kind of solitary the experience was for us.
At the top there is the community program they have at Ila Lodge, and both in Victoria Falls with the Lower Zambezi, with South Luangwa, and here, people have gone out of their way to support their community programs. Normally these things are supported by conservation fee or part of the profit of visiting a lodge or something like that. And that has been impacted, as you probably all know, very severely all across Africa. A lot of anti-poaching conservation efforts and things like that. And the nice thing in Zambia was all the guys that we visited have, gone out of their way to, they had to scale back some of the stuff and some of the salaries and things like that. Obviously, like everyone had to adjust, but there was still a very strong component of looking after the communities and keeping up the commitment to the communities. And that underpins tourism in any of the African entities. On the next slide there.
I love this actually. So one of the questions that the team asked us is what were our favorite experiences? And I'm going to very quickly jump in here and say my absolute all-time favorite destination in Zambia, and I'm biased, I know, but my absolute all-time favorite is Sausage Tree on the Lower Zambezi. And it's because of this photo. I mean, there's
the one on the right.
The one on the right. This is me in my plunge pool in one of the suites that we stayed in. The elephants walk right through camp, right down in front of you. They drink on the river, and then they go and they swim out to these islands. And to be able to just go, because it's hot. Zambia in October, November, it's hot. You go for a dip in your plunge pool in the middle of the day and you're swimming around, and the next thing you know, you're on safari and you haven't even left. And this happened every single day.
A couple of times
my
a
favorite,
day, actually.
my absolute favorite.
I think on the next slide there, that was our breakfast setting again with the elephants who crossed over and are now in front of us. And whether you're sitting there reading your book or getting ready for your game drive, even before you go on your game drive, you always had elephants, buffalo, hippo, crocodile right in front of you, like 24/7. So in the dry season, this is one of my favorite parts of Africa. And the next one is one of my favorite activities there, and that's canoeing down some of the side channels, getting really close to elephants. You do dodge about 60 hippos on that channel, but I feel safe going in shallow water because you can kind of skirt by the hippos if you're in shallow water because they feel safe in deep water and will never come into the shallows. And it's just hands down, one of my all-time favorite. Again, it's silent, it's not a motor, it's not a vehicle, in gliding up to the birds and the elephants and the buffaloes and everything coming down to drink. We even saw a leopard on the banks of the river there. That's one of my favorite things. So these things are all there. This particular lodge gives everyone a private experience, whether it's times of COVID or not. So you have a lot of flexibility to do what you want to do, when you want to do it, and at your pace or timing and anything like that.
I was going to say, we're totally biased because the next picture shows you a lunch in the river, which is another one of my favorite experiences. And I could basically just live at this property because how often do you get to actually have lunch with your feet in the waters of the Zambezi, on a sandbar, in the shade? We're drinking Pims. After lunch, one of our friends in this picture and she and I walked up to the end of the sandbar and just kind of swam around, to be able to swim in the Zambezi. And then every now and then you see the elephants crossing and stuff. It's just, these are some of the most rare and for me, awesome experiences that you can have. And
on the next slide, it's the same as our group of friends. So once you're with your group of friends sitting around, I mean, you can decide whether to wear masks or not, and that'll depend. But we're not mixing people together, you know, at the lodges. So very much taking this seriously. I think on the next slide, if I remember correctly, we're showing the sanitation stations and everything like that. So definitely take that seriously, but your experience is phenomenal. It's the same as what it's always been, if not better, because of fewer people around.
And this leopard is, the next picture is of one of the most epic experiences or animal viewing experiences.
Who took the shot?
Johann, he's the photographer, I'm the writer. I will never own up to taking a good picture, but I can explain.
Like, this is an amazing leopard shot.
Candice, this was incredible. So again, you know, no matter when, you're always going to have your own private vehicle at Sausage Tree. And Potato Bush, we left, and within 15 minutes of leaving camp one morning, we find 2 leopards on the banks going down into, you know, kind of like a depression. We sat there, the 2 of us, no other vehicles, no other people, for like more than an hour watching these 2 leopards. And so they had to kill, and one's up a tree, and then it took it down from the tree, and they're eating. I mean, it was a male and a female. The whole thing, we were going, this doesn't happen. How is this actually happening? And I mean, basically, eventually our guide was like, do you want to like go for lunch? Your friends are waiting. And we were like, no, okay, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, the animal being is definitely superb.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then we go to Lusaka, which I'm going to jump right on in here because, as again, the team knows, I love the urban life in Africa. And I can appreciate that right now, urban life might not be as enticing because of, you know, just COVID and people wanting to be out in those big open spaces. But as we mentioned, Zambia has very few cases. Latitude 15 is a beautiful hotel right in the center of the city, some of the best signage we've ever come across. I mean, and then it is an art gallery unto itself. And it has all of these open spaces, 2 pools, a beautiful gym and spa. And it features artists from all over Zambia. You can do incredible shopping here. Plug for stay longer as well. They actually have a little like WeWork area. It's called The Works. We did webinars, Zooms, board reports. You can work from Africa. You can school from Africa. You can just be. Many places are doing some nice kind of deals if you want to stay longer. And as I've said kind of repeatedly, I mean, we're sitting in Colorado and I'm looking at the snow falling. If I think of the North American winter and what we're about to go into and having to be inside when it's cold outside, when it's snowing outside, I would much rather pack up my computer and go and work from Africa for a month where it's going to be warm and I'm going to be outside and someone else is going to be, quite honestly, taking care of me. And I can just focus on what I need to focus on. So you do have the ability to do more than just safari. And I think that that's a nice option. We know a lot of people that have basically left the US and gone to the Caribbean, or, you know, they're looking for places to get away. And a property like this would be perfect for that.
And there's even some of the safari lodges, I haven't sent it to you yet, but we just came up with some specials where you can stay, you know, if you want to stay for 2 weeks or a week or something, I mean, you can pay, you know, a fifth of what you would normally pay. Something like that. I will send it to you and you can share it as well.
Candice is like I'm out.
But you know, the one of the realities of travel now is there are all kinds of regulations depending on countries, depending on airlines, depending on where you're flying to, where your home is, or where you're continuing on to, about getting another COVID test before you leave. Zambia flirted a little bit with needing a COVID test when you leave, and they did that in October, but then they actually canceled it again. So you don't need one on the way out unless your airline or destination country requires it. Now, if they require it, this is the perfect place to come and spend a day or so. Lovely hotel, as Brooke said, lots of corners and spaces and lots of open air areas. We were actually in a suite with
a kitchen and a dining room as well. I mean, it's kind of like a little condo.
And as an African city, Lusaka actually has some interesting this art gallery is about 2 blocks away from Latitude as well. So we took the time to explore a little bit. we didn't need a COVID test for our flight back home, but then we decided to stay on. So we needed it before going to the next country. And they have actually set up a clinic in, so the one we went to, so firstly, there's lots of nice, cool shopping to do. And few people know it, but very similar to Sheldrick in Kenya, you can actually go
going back
and hang out with the little elephants in Lusaka. There's an elephant rescue project, which is kind of like the antithesis of the Sheldrick experience. It's not as busy. It's very much very few people there. I think it's done very authentically. And
actually, if you watch the movie Holiday in the Wild that was on Netflix last year, sorry, you know what? Because like, I think that it's always interesting. PR does a really good job of promoting certain things. And then when you don't have PR, like you don't hear about these other things. Holiday in the Wild was actually filmed here. You know, so even though everyone knows about Sheldrick, that movie really captured the essence of what they're doing here. It was also filmed at Jabulani in South Africa. So two different places where they, you know, filmed this. But at Lalai, what's her name? Kristen, not Dixon, but
Sex and the City girl.
Yeah, like, thank you, Sex and the City girl. They stayed here. They stayed at this property and they filmed here. And it is a beautiful elephant rescue experience that you can be a part of. But then, yeah, so Johann was speaking about the COVID test that you can get.
So then we needed a COVID test. So we went, there's the Center for Infectious Diseases. We actually met with the head of the center, gentleman who was like, just talking about the general prevalence. And that's kind of where we got a lot of the data as well about the low numbers there. So this facility we went to is no longer, and your clients will never see that, or you would never see that. This was the sort of tent they set up in the yard of their research center. And the day after we did this test, they opened a facility for tourists in a nice, clean, white, you know, doctors kind of environment.
Brand new building,
on the way to the airport, like it's a really nice, snazzy. We went to have a look at it, but it wasn't operating, but it started operating a day or two after we left. And again, it was kind of straightforward. They tell you that you get your results in 24 hours, but they ask you to allow 48 because if they do get a positive, they have to retest it in case it's a false positive. And I guess if you get a positive and a negative, you have to maybe retest it a third time to make sure it's a negative. But, you know, so far, I mean, it's very rare for that to happen. But as I say, Latitude with a few art galleries, maybe the elephants and things like that, there's enough to do in Lusaka, or sometimes just taking a day before your flight's back to go through the thousands of cool pictures you took on your safari and chill, you know, a little bit before starting your homebound trip. But if you do need a COVID test because you're going on to another country or you're flying through South Africa, they require one at the moment still, even if you're flying through there. By all means, it is very easy to get it, and it was seamless. And the next day we got everything and printed out certificate, everything like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's kind of our trip, you know, like it's the key message for me was that I felt safer in Africa than here. Every stage of the process was thought through, and it was not cumbersome to the extent that I was like, yeah, why would I spend my time and money on doing this? I mean, the travel, yes, wearing a mask on the plane and the this and that and a bit of hand sanitizer, but it wasn't detrimental to the overall experience much. And the safari experience was phenomenal. And, you know, it's in Africa. I mean, I wish I could go now and spend the next 6 months in Africa, you know, and just get away and come back when this whole thing is done and everyone's vaccinated and we can carry on with life, you know. But in the meantime, you know, before we all get access to a vaccination or, you know, it gets more widely available, I do feel that with the testing and the systems they have in place, you can safely go on vacation. Probably safer than 90% of anything you can do in the States, you know, or in our local backyard, you know, even including like visiting families or something. So yeah, that's our story.
And we're sticking to it.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna stop. Well, actually, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Hold on. Oh, we're gonna get a more invasive COVID.
I want to stop there.
And a cheers photo. So we're going to open it up to questions for everybody, but just before we do that, I just want to remind everyone or tell you for the first time, we're actually going to get a little bit closer to home and focus on the one and only new properties in Mexico for our January Travel Tuesday. So keep that in mind if you're around and looking for a quick getaway.
Work with me to South Africa. I'm going to be staying at the one and only Cape Town.
Yes, or go with Brooke. So if anybody has any questions, do you want to pop them into chat? I can't see any. Do you see any now, Laura?
I don't see any either. Again, Brooke and Johann did go to Uganda, and they were recently in Kenya as well. So any queries on that, you can also feel free to kind of pop that in there too.
Well, I'll just say one very quick thing about Uganda, because it makes sense with everything else we're talking about when it comes to safari, is when we were in Uganda, just as a great for instance, usually you buy your gorilla trekking permit or your chimp trekking permit and you're with a group of people. And because we were some of the first into Uganda, we bought our 2 gorilla trekking permits and had a completely private trek because there are so few people. So as we've been speaking about with Zambia or my experience in Kenya, I understand everybody has their own personal situations to consider. If a personal situation allows for you to travel now, the opportunities to have a private, personalized experience in Africa, it's better than it's ever been. It's remarkable to think that you can have a private gorilla trek and only buy your 2 permits and there just aren't other people around right now. And that is going to change. Absolutely. I mean, as all of the 2020 bookings have been postponed to 2021, or as more people feel comfortable. So clearly you can tell I'm just basically saying go as soon as you can, because it's going to be a once in a lifetime.
Karen had a question. How many days were you in Zambia and what was the total cost?
Well, it's hard for us to say.
Yeah.
I think African Endeavours team are better at answering that. We were there for about 2 weeks, and I think the average visit is somewhere along those lines. I mean, typically you want to go to Lower Zambezi for about 4 nights. You want to go to South Luangwa for at least 4, and sometimes people, because it's a long valley, you can stay at maybe 2 different areas. Some people go even for 5, 6 nights there. If you do end up going to Kofui, that's another, at least sort of 3 nights, and Vic Falls is 2, 3 nights. So kind of like sort of in that sort of 12 to 14 night range is what most people would do. Cost-wise, I mean, I'm not going to go into detail with that because it depends on the season. It depends on, there's some great specials out there at the moment. There's all kinds of stuff. But, compared to Zambia, compares very favorably with all other African safari destinations. And compared to somewhere like Botswana, I mean, I love Botswana and everything it offers, but it has become, twice, if not sometimes 3 times the price of a safari in Zambia. And, it's kind of one of my favorite sayings is like Zambia's Botswana sort of 10, 15 years ago before they went too fancy and over the top. Both great destinations. It's apples and pears. You don't directly compare it with each other. They're neighboring fruit, but slightly different. But yeah, I mean, I do feel that Zambia has some of the most authentic safari experiences and some of the best values out there. And the African Endeavours team have all that info to share with you and can put you on the right track there.
And something I'll mention as well that, again, the team has all the access to are some of these properties are doing really incredible stay longer packages. My trip to Kenya was incredible. I was able to stay at one property for 8 nights. I was at Cotter's for 8 nights. I was at Oljogi for 5 nights. Sausage Tree has a stay longer package in Zambia. I'm highlighting some, but many have these. And my personal feel is a lot of people, especially from North America, I understand this. We want to see and do and get around, and we've got checklists, and there's this thought that I'm going to miss something. Stay longer in fewer destinations right now. You take advantage of those specials and those packages. Some are doing free flights. I mean, there's so many different ways of looking at it. But again, for me, it goes back to that rejuvenation. Every one of the properties that we went to, and I would say that across all of the different travel experiences that I've had this year, I was not able to do everything that they offered and still relax and read a book and read and just think, just like let the stress of the year kind of fall away. And there's so much to really appreciate and to dig into in these places, that those stay longer packages are not just meant to be a good financial break. It's because you really should be staying longer in fewer destinations.
Thank you. I think we had a couple more. Deborah asked what the park fees were for gorillas when you guys were there.
No, Uganda is actually 700, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think I did see they're doing a special through May, Laura. Did you see that? Is it $400 now?
I haven't gotten to that email yet.
Exactly. I mean, it's like, now is the time, to look into that too, because there are specials. I think even Rwanda was 1,500, and they're doing a special for a short amount of time as well.
Yeah, Rwanda does that. Like, if you do 2 parks, they do 30% discount. Yeah,
but if you're getting to, in normal times, let's put it that way, outside of like last minute specials at the moment, but in normal times, Uganda is about 700 if you're going gorilla trekking there, and your permits in Rwanda is about 1,500.
Yeah.
So it's pretty good value. They also offer, for someone who's really interested, you can do an habituation experience in Uganda, and that's, I believe, 1,200. But then you spend 4 hours with the gorillas. And then the chimp permit was, I don't know, 150 or, it's like in the 100 range, 100 to 200 range. But yeah, very good value and just an amazing experience. I mean, just being eye to eye with chimps or gorillas, our closest living relatives, it's an off the chart level experience. And many of your team have done it, so people can talk.
It's hard to describe unless you've done it. It's just amazing. So everyone needs to add that to their list. Nathan was just inquiring about COVID test pricing. Do you guys have a ballpark?
Zambia was about 150.
Okay.
In Lusaka.
Yeah, a little bit less, but yeah, roughly
because
that.
of the exchange rate.
I think it was 130, 140, but I think they were trying to make it 150, and then the currency changed. So I think everywhere from what I've seen, it's kind of in the sort of 50 to 150 range in Africa. And it's coming down a little bit as, it becomes just easier to access and it's more prevalent around there.
And it's going to change slightly if you are having it done on property. Certain private properties are doing them. I'll speak for a second about South Africa. So there are certain properties in the Sabi Sands, Greater Kruger area that can do COVID tests on property for you, and you carry on with your experience. Some of those I've seen at a much higher price point than, for instance, one of the properties just that I do work with called Swallow. They also can do them on property, but there's 2 totally different price points. In Zambia, there are properties at Vic Falls, Livingston, that can do them on property as well. So when we give you numbers, that's just our experience, but then different city versus safari, different, private areas, it's going to cost something slightly different.
The numbers we gave, that 50 to 150 is if you have it done in the city before leaving. If you helicopter out the nurse to come and take the sample, and then helicopter back and then to where they do the sample test, it's going to start adding up. I saw the wilderness one for Botswana today. Like it's and it's actually not ridiculous in their case either. Like it's still costs like $330 or something, like for some.
Not bad.
Yeah,
but I guess the other thing I would say is you look at it this way. If you were, say, to go back to Lusaka, you may possibly have a lower cost test, but then you're also going to be paying to stay at the hotel. Versus you might pay a little bit more to have it done at the safari property, but then you're carrying on with your safari while the test is being processed. And again, every country is different. I've seen vastly different things throughout Kenya. So that's where, your team here is going to be able to give you all that information. Just know that it varies and that there's always a toss up as to, am I staying on safari while my test is being processed, or am I in an urban environment doing other things while my test is being processed?
I think the outlier in this will be Tanzania. That's the one probably with the most hiccups. But everywhere else has been logistically not that challenging to get a COVID test if you have to have one on departure. I mean, I even know in like Namibia, they will fly somebody up to like the Skeleton Coast to give it to you to.
And the important thing, as Brooke mentioned, if you do single country, or if when you depart from the last country you're at, I mean, chances are if you pick the right airline, you're not going to need a test.
Yeah.
Ethiopian doesn't require it.
You
so
know,
that's why one of the reasons we fly Ethiopian. Lufthansa doesn't.
I mean, it's and again, there the team can advise you on options.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Awesome.
Thank you guys so much for your time, and thanks for everybody for joining us. Hopefully it was informational and getting everybody excited to travel to Africa, either for the first time or again. So yeah, thanks again, everybody. Have a great night, and hope to see you guys next month. Have a great holiday season. And thank you, Brooke and Johann, again. As always, you guys are the best, and thank you for all your support.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. We always love to
We love you.
We love you guys. Thank you so
love
much.
all of your guests.
Thanks,
Thank you very
everyone.
much for your time tonight.
To get to Africa.
Travel, Brooke.
Yeah, Brooke, have a great trip.
Thank
I wish
you.
I could with you.
Ciao.
Bye, guys. Thank you.